The wind rolled across the dry fields of Deadwood Flats, carrying with it the scent of dust, sweat, and something wild. The townsfolk said it was cursed, the way that black mustang appeared and vanished like a ghost at the edge of the hills. He stood there again, just as the sun dipped behind the ridge, casting long shadows over the dirt road. Beckham Rawlins, the horse no man could ride. Not Travis Lockhart, not even old Coulter Hensley, who once broke 50 wild stallions in a single season. The townsfolk watched in silence, afraid to approach. The scars on Beckham's flank told stories no one dared ask about. From the rusted porch of an old weather-beaten ranch house, Garrett Whitmore watched too, his fingers tightening around the rail. 14 years old, but his eyes had the weight of a man twice his age. Ever since the accident that took his parents, Garrett had lived with his grandfather Coulter, a man who loved him like a son but spoke little and prayed more. The boy had grown quiet, just like the house, and just like the land, until now. Something in the horse's stance pulled at him. Not fear. Recognition. It was like staring into a mirror he didn't know existed. Inside, Coulter sipped his evening coffee, watching the horse from the window with a heavy brow. He hadn't spoken of Beckham Rawlins in years, not since the horse had thrown his son. The same day everything changed. There were things about that day he never told Garrett, things no one knew. But now the past had come trotting back on 4 hooves, and it was staring them down like unfinished business. That night, Garrett couldn't sleep. The wind howled through the cracks in the wood, whispering secrets he couldn't understand. He thought of his father's voice, now just an echo in his memory. He thought of the look in Beckham's eyes, fierce, yes, but broken too. That horse wasn't just wild. He was wounded, just like him. Maybe that's why he couldn't look away. Maybe that's why, in the quiet hours before dawn, Garrett made a decision no one expected. As the first light broke over Deadwood Flats, Garrett pulled on his boots and stepped outside. The air was cold, biting at his skin. Beckham stood in the distance, watching, waiting. Every story in town said he was untouchable, that he would kill any man who tried. But Garrett wasn't a man. He was a boy with nothing left to lose, and something in him whispered, "Try." He took one step toward the fence, then another. Behind him, Coulter opened the door, coffee cup trembling in his hand. "Garrett, what the hell are you doing?" Garrett didn't answer his grandfather. He couldn't. Words would have shattered the fragile calm building inside him, like the hush before a summer storm. He kept walking, slow and steady, the dry dirt crunching under his boots. Beckham Rawlins didn't move. The horse watched him with those wild black eyes, still, calculating. The space between them was electric, as if both carried something broken inside that only the other could sense. At the porch, Coulter Hensley stepped down, heart thudding in his chest. He hadn't seen someone walk toward that horse in years, not since his own son did, and didn't walk back. Garrett stopped just a few feet from the fence line. He swallowed hard. He could hear every beat of his heart in his ears, every gust of wind bending the prairie grass. Beckham's ears twitched. His hooves shifted slightly, a warning. One wrong move and this could go bad. But Garrett didn't raise a hand. He didn't make a sound. He just stood there, meeting the animal's gaze with something deeper than courage, understanding. Behind him, Coulter watched in stunned silence, the mug slipping from his hand and shattering on the porch boards. In town, word spread fast. Weston Granger, the sheriff, got wind of it before noon. By the time he reached the ranch, Travis Lockhart was already there, leaning against the corral like a man itching to say, "I told you so." Travis had nearly broken his back trying to tame Beckham 2 years earlier. Seeing a skinny kid walk right up to that same monster stirred something ugly in him. "He's gonna get himself killed," he muttered, loud enough for Coulter to hear. But Coulter didn't respond. He couldn't take his eyes off the boy, his grandson, doing what no grown man had dared since that terrible day. Back at the fence, Garrett sat down slowly in the dirt, legs crossed, eyes still locked with Beckham's. He remembered a moment, long ago, his father lifting him into the saddle for the first time, whispering, "Don't control the horse. Connect with it." It was a memory buried deep, but now it burned like sunlight. Beckham snorted, pawed the ground once, then took a step forward. Just one. But enough. The tension in the air shifted. Something ancient, something sacred, passed between boy and beast. "Damn fool kid," Travis muttered again, but even he didn't believe it anymore. Sheriff Granger stood beside him, arms crossed. "That ain't foolishness," he said quietly. "That's something else." As the sky turned a soft gold behind the hills, Beckham lowered his head, just slightly, and stood still. Garrett didn't move. Not yet. But deep down, he knew this was only the beginning. Because once you step into the heart of something wild, it doesn't let you walk away unchanged. Coulter sat at the edge of the porch long after the sun had dipped below the horizon. The cold from the planks crept into his bones, but he didn't feel it. All he could see was the outline of Garrett in the fading light, still sitting there by the fence, still waiting. And Beckham, damn that horse, still watching the boy like he knew him. Coulter felt the past rising like smoke from a forgotten fire. That same horse had once stood in that very field, and a younger version of Coulter had watched his son, Garrett's father, step into the corral with the same fire in his eyes. The memory stung, sharp and uninvited. Inside the house, the silence was heavy. Coulter poured himself a drink he hadn't touched in years, hands trembling as he set the glass down. He opened an old box from under the floorboard. Inside were faded photos, a broken spur, and a folded newspaper clipping. "Local trainer dies in tragic rodeo accident." The photo showed a smiling man beside a younger Beckham, before the wild took over. Coulter traced the edges with his fingers, whispering, "I should have told you the truth, Garrett, but how do you tell a boy that the horse he's drawn to killed his father?" Down by the fence, Garrett leaned back on his elbows, staring at the stars. The weight of the day pressed on him, but there was something peaceful in Beckham's presence now. The horse hadn't left. That alone felt like a kind of miracle. Garrett didn't know why he felt so connected to this animal, but it was more than curiosity. It was like a piece of himself had been missing, and Beckham had brought it back. His mom used to tell him stories about horses carrying the spirits of those who passed. It sounded crazy then. No, not so much. In town, Jasper Holleran, the old storyteller, sat outside the diner, sipping sweet tea and listening to whispers from folks who'd driven past the Whitmore place. He smiled under his breath. "That horse never stayed for no one," he muttered. "Except that boy. Means something." His eyes, cloudy but sharp, turned toward the horizon. Jasper had known Beckham since birth. He knew the story nobody wanted to tell. Back at the ranch, Sheriff Weston Granger approached Coulter with slow, cautious steps. "You didn't tell him, did you?" Coulter didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked at the photo one more time and folded it gently. "No," he said finally, his voice gravelly. "But I think Beckham will." That night, as Garrett finally drifted off to sleep beside the fence, Beckham stood guard. The wind was quiet now. But in the silence, something deeper had begun to stir, something buried beneath years of pain, waiting to rise. The next morning brought a chill sharper than usual. Frost laced the tips of the prairie grass, and Garrett could see his breath as he walked back toward the fence, a blanket still draped around his shoulders. Beckham stood just where he'd left him, unmoved, unblinking. It was strange how quickly the fear had faded. The stallion no longer felt like a threat. He felt like a presence, like someone who'd been waiting. Garrett took an apple from his pocket, held it out, palm open. Beckham didn't move. But he didn't run either. Inside the barn, Coulter Hensley stared at the saddle hanging on the wall. It belonged to his son. He hadn't touched it in years, not since the accident. Dust covered every inch of the leather, but the initials JW still showed through. Coulter's jaw clenched. Every time he looked at Garrett, he saw the boy's father. And now, watching Garrett with that horse, it was like reliving everything all over again. Only this time, something was different. Garrett wasn't trying to tame the animal. He was trying to understand it. That terrified Coulter more than anything. At the diner in town, Jasper Halloran leaned in close to Sheriff Granger, lowering his voice. That horse wasn't always like this, you know. Beckham was gentle once. Loyal. Hell, he was the best damn rodeo horse this county ever saw. The sheriff gave him a look. What happened? Jasper took a long sip of his coffee before answering. He watched his rider die. Right there in the arena. Some say he snapped. Some say he remembers. Sheriff Granger looked out the window toward the hills. And some say he's waitin' for that boy. Garrett returned to the fence every hour that day, never pushing too hard, just sitting, watching, speaking softly. He told Beckham things he hadn't told anyone, about his mom's last words, about the night his dad never came home, about the silence in the house that even music couldn't fill. And Beckham listened. Or at least, he stayed. Sometimes, that was enough. By sunset, Coulter stood in the barn doorway, watching Garrett again. A heavy breath escaped his chest. He knew it was only a matter of time before the boy would want answers. And when that time came, Coulter would have to choose. Tell the truth and risk everything, or stay silent and let the past keep poisoning the future. That evening, as Garrett reached out one last time, Beckham stepped forward. Slowly, carefully. His nose touched Garrett's hand, briefly, like a memory brushing past the skin. And in that moment, something shifted. But neither of them noticed the shadow watching from the ridge. Ridge Calhoun, eyes narrow, fists clenched. The air around the ranch had changed. It wasn't just Beckham's presence anymore. It was the boy. Garrett had become a part of the field, of the silence, of the rhythm that even the wind seemed to follow. Every day he returned to the fence, and every day Beckham came closer. They didn't need reins or rope. What passed between them was older than training, older than fear. But not everyone saw it that way. At the far end of the pasture, Ridge Calhoun sat on horseback, jaw tight, eyes locked on the scene unfolding below like a man watching something he didn't understand, and hated because of it. Ridge had always been the one the town praised. He was strong, fast, born in the saddle, and had the swagger to match. But ever since Garrett showed up at Coulter's ranch, things started to shift. People were talking about him now. The quiet boy with no rodeo trophies, no bloodline, no reputation. Just something else. Ridge didn't believe in connection or patience. Horses respected dominance, or they walked all over you. That's what his father taught him. That's what he lived by. Watching Garrett tame Beckham without a single rope felt like watching someone rewrite the rules, and Ridge wasn't going to let that stand. Inside the house, Coulter sat with Sheriff Granger again, the old newspaper clipping unfolded between them. "He's gonna ask soon," Coulter muttered, staring at the faded headline. "And when he does, I don't know if I got it in me to say the words out loud." Granger nodded slowly. "You've protected him long enough, Colt. But the truth's gonna come whether you speak it or not." Coulter rubbed his eyes. "I don't want him to hate me." "He won't," Granger said. "But he might hate the silence." That night, Ridge slipped onto the ranch with a halter in one hand and bitterness in the other. He didn't tell anyone he was coming. Didn't ask permission. He just acted. Beckham was grazing near the barn, calm and unguarded. Ridge moved quickly, confidently, the way he'd been taught. But the second the rope touched Beckham's neck, the stallion exploded. Dirt flew, hooves slammed against the fence, and Ridge went down hard, groaning as pain shot through his ribs. Garrett woke to the sound of chaos, bolting out of bed barefoot. He reached the barn in seconds, just in time to see Beckham rearing, eyes wide, breathing hard. Ridge lay in the dirt, humiliated and furious. "You need to keep that damn animal locked up," he shouted. "He's a danger to this whole town." But Garrett didn't look at Ridge. He looked at Beckham, and saw something in the horse's eyes he hadn't seen before. Fear. Not of Ridge, but of the past. And from the porch, Coulter watched, knowing the past had just kicked its way back into all their lives, louder than ever. The barn was quiet again, but the damage had been done. Splinters from the broken gate lay scattered across the floor, and Beckham paced inside the stall, nostrils flared, tail swishing with unease. Garrett stood in the doorway, fists clenched, jaw tight. He hadn't spoken to Ridge after the incident. There was nothing to say. What Ridge tried to do wasn't bravery, it was control masked as pride. And Beckham knew it. Garrett's heart ached as he watched the stallion shift restlessly. He was protecting himself, Garrett thought, not attacking. There was a difference. A big one. But would the town ever understand that? Coulter stayed up late that night, sitting at the kitchen table with the lights off. The only sound in the house was the slow ticking of the clock on the wall. He'd hoped to bury the truth with the years, let time dull the edges of the pain. But now, watching Garrett form the same bond his father once had, it was like watching a ghost return. Finally, he reached for the folded newspaper one more time. His fingers shook as he opened it. "You deserve to know," he whispered into the dark. "God help me. You deserve to know." The next morning, Garrett was surprised to see Jasper Halloran waiting near the fence, leaning on his cane with a look that didn't belong to gossip or curiosity, but memory. "He's not just any horse, son," Jasper said, voice low. "I watched that stallion grow up. I was there when your daddy first rode him. I was there, the day it all went wrong." Garrett stepped closer, unsure whether to ask or just listen. Jasper didn't give him the choice. "Beckham was your father's sole horse. The kind you only meet once. But in the end, he couldn't save him." Garrett's throat tightened. "My grandfather never talks about that day." Jasper nodded slowly. "Because it wasn't just your daddy who got hurt. It was all of us." Beckham ran for days after that rodeo. When they finally found him, he wasn't the same. And neither was Coulter. Jasper looked Garrett in the eyes. "That horse doesn't just carry scars on his body. He carries them in his memory. Same as you." Then he turned and walked away, leaving Garrett with a weight heavier than any saddle. That evening, Garrett entered the stall for the first time. No rope. No halter. Just trust. Beckham didn't move, he just watched. Garrett raised a shaky hand and laid it gently on the stallion's neck. The moment stretched long and silent, until Beckham let out a breath and lowered his head. Garrett whispered, "You remember him, don't you?" Beckham didn't answer, but he didn't need to. Outside, Coulter stood in the shadow of the barn, listening, finally ready to speak, but unsure if he was already too late. The sun was setting behind the barn when Coulter Hensley finally stepped inside. His boots echoed against the wooden floor, and the scent of old hay and leather seemed heavier than usual. Garrett was brushing Beckham's coat, his movements slow, methodical, like he was trying to understand something without words. Coulter stood there, watching, a knot tightening in his chest. It wasn't just the boy's bond with the horse, it was the reflection. The way Garrett moved, the way he stood beside Beckham, it was exactly how his father had once looked. It was like time had folded in on itself. Garrett didn't turn around when he heard his grandfather. He just kept brushing, quiet. The silence stretched long until Coulter finally broke it. "He was your father's horse." Garrett froze, hand resting gently on Beckham's side. Coulter continued, voice low and gruff. "They were inseparable. Your dad trained him from the time he was just a colt. No one else could ride him, not even me." Garrett turned slowly, eyes searching Coulter's face. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" he asked, barely above a whisper. Coulter looked away. "Because the day your father died, Beckham was there." Coulter sat down on a nearby bale of hay, shoulders hunched. It was a rodeo in Billings. Last ride of the night. Beckham spooked before the gate even opened. Your father tried to calm him, but something snapped. Maybe it was the crowd. Maybe it was something deeper. He got thrown. Hit the post head first. Coulter paused, his voice cracking. He died before he hit the ground. Garrett felt his chest tighten, like the air had been sucked out of the barn. Beckham, still as stone, lowered his head, as if he remembered too. "I blamed the horse," Coulter admitted. "Sold him off to a breeder out west. Figured that would be the end of it." He let out a bitter laugh. "But he came back." 3 years later, someone spotted him running wild near the old ridge. Nobody could catch him. Folks started calling him cursed. Dangerous. Coulter looked at Garrett. "But I think he was looking for something. Or someone." Garrett stepped closer to Beckham, placing his hand gently on the stallion's neck. "He wasn't looking for someone," he said. "He was looking for him. For Dad." The words hit Coulter like a blow. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "Maybe so," he said. "And maybe he found him in you." Outside, the wind picked up again, sweeping across the prairie like a whisper through time. The boy, the man, and the horse stood in a moment suspended between past and present, each of them scarred, but somehow still standing. The next morning broke quiet, but Garrett felt the air was different, heavier somehow, like the sky was holding its breath. Beckham stood near the gate, still and watchful, as if sensing something no one else could. Garrett walked toward him with the saddle in hand, his palms sweating. This wasn't about riding for glory. It was about trust, closure, connection. His heart pounded louder with every step. "We don't have to do this," he whispered to the stallion. "But I think we both need it." Beckham didn't flinch. He lowered his head, and Garrett took that as permission. Coulter watched from the porch, his weathered hands gripping the railing. It had been years since he'd seen anyone even try to saddle Beckham, and even longer since he'd let them. But what struck him wasn't fear, it was awe. The way Beckham responded to Garrett wasn't instinct. It was memory. Blood calling to blood. Coulter wiped his eyes as Garrett climbed slowly onto the saddle, every movement measured, respectful. Beckham shifted beneath him but didn't buck. For the first time in over a decade, the stallion accepted a rider. But peace, like all things, didn't last. Ridge Calhoun arrived. Unannounced, a shotgun slung across his shoulder and anger boiling beneath his skin. Word had spread about Garrett riding the killer horse, and Ridge wasn't going to let his own pride die quietly. "Get off him, Whitmore," Ridge barked as he stepped into the field. "That animal's dangerous. Should have been put down years ago." Garrett didn't move. Beckham snorted, uneasy under the weight of tension. "You don't understand him," Garrett said, voice firm. "You never even tried." Ridge took another step forward, eyes narrowing. "No, you don't understand. That horse ruined lives, including yours." Inside the house, Coulter grabbed his coat and rifle and ran. Outside, the confrontation was escalating fast. Ridge raised the barrel slightly, not quite aiming, but threatening. "You want to see what happens when you play hero, Garrett? Fine. Let's see how much he really trusts you." Beckham reared up, not out of rage, but fear. Garrett tightened his grip, whispering calming words, trying to keep the stallion grounded. His voice cracked, but he didn't let go. "Put the gun down, Ridge. Coulter's voice rang out like a thunderclap. He stood between the boys now, aiming his own rifle directly at Ridge. "You wanna settle something? Settle it with me." For a second, no one moved. Then Ridge, with shaking hands and a bitter curse, lowered the weapon and stormed off. The silence that followed was deafening. Garrett slid off Beckham, legs weak, heart racing. Coulter walked over, eyes full of everything he'd never said. "You just did what no man in this town ever could," he said. "You didn't just ride him. You healed him." The next few days passed in a blur. No more visits from Ridge. No more whispers of violence. Just the quiet hum of life returning to the ranch. But something had changed, within the town, within Garrett, and most of all, within Coulter. The man who had once avoided the barn now walked beside his grandson every morning. He didn't say much, but when he did, his voice carried a softness Garrett had never heard before. They spoke less like guardian and child, and more like two people slowly piecing back together something that had long been broken. The townsfolk took notice too. Some came out just to watch Garrett ride. Others brought stories, questions, old memories of his father. And in the center of it all stood Beckham Rawlins, no longer the demon of Deadwood Flats, but a living legend. He didn't belong to anyone, and somehow he belonged to everyone. Even Sheriff Weston Granger came by the ranch, tipping his hat as he watched Garrett guide Beckham through the field. No reins, no commands, just presence. "Never thought I'd live to see that horse at peace," he murmured. "Guess we all carry things too long." In the evenings, Coulter and Garrett sat on the porch together, not always talking, but always together. One night, as the sun dipped low, Coulter finally handed Garrett the old newspaper clipping, worn and folded at the corners. Garrett read it in silence, eyes skimming the headline about the accident that took his father's life. "He wasn't careless," Coulter said quietly. "He loved that horse. Trusted him. What happened wasn't anyone's fault. But I couldn't live with it. So I blamed Beckham. And myself." Garrett looked up, the pain in his chest finally giving way to clarity. "He didn't die because of Beckham," he said. "He died doing what he loved. And I think Beckham came back looking for someone to carry that love forward." Coulter nodded slowly. "And he found you." They didn't say much more after that. They didn't have to. Later that week, Garrett rode Beckham into town. Not for show, not for pride, but simply because it felt right. The same streets where whispers once followed him now filled with quiet nods, respectful glances, and for the first time, understanding. Ridge wasn't there. No one knew where he'd gone. But his absence felt more like a closed door than an open wound. Garrett didn't need revenge. He had something better now. Peace. That night, Garrett dreamed of his father. Not in sadness, but in calm. He stood by a fence just like this one, smiling, hand resting on Beckham's mane. And when Garrett reached for him, he didn't fade. He stayed. A month later, the fields of Deadwood Flats were alive with color. Wildflowers danced in the wind, and the air carried that early summer warmth that made everything feel possible again. Garrett rode Beckham without a saddle now, his legs strong, his balance sure. They moved as one, fluid, instinctual, and quiet. Around them, the land felt different. Not healed, exactly, but healing. That was enough. Every hoofbeat echoed not just across the ground, but across the history of the family that had lived, lost, and somehow endured here. Coulter stood by the barn, arms crossed, watching with a half-smile tugging at his lips. The weight in his chest had lightened, though he still carried the scars of everything unsaid. But Garrett's forgiveness, so freely given, had softened something in him he thought was gone. In the boy, he saw not just his son, but hope. A continuation. "You know," he said one evening, rocking gently on the porch, "your father used to say that horses don't follow strength, they follow honesty." Garrett, sitting beside him, just nodded. Then Beckham's in the right hands now. Later that week, the town held its annual harvest fair, the first in years where folks weren't afraid to gather. Sheriff Granger invited Garrett to do a quiet exhibition, nothing fancy, just a few laps around the old rodeo pen. Garrett hesitated at first, unsure if Beckham would tolerate the noise. But when he opened the gate that morning, Beckham walked toward him without pause. No rope, no halter, just that deep, silent understanding between two souls who had been broken and rebuilt together. The crowd was quiet as Garrett entered the ring. Beckham trotted gracefully beneath him, calm and sure. No wild bucking, no fear, just rhythm, connection, and a boy who rode like he belonged there, because he did. As they circled one last time, Garrett looked up and caught Coulter's eyes across the arena. The old man tipped his hat, eyes glassy with pride. Garrett smiled, and in that smile was every mile they'd traveled to get here. After the ride, people came up to him. Neighbors, old cowboys, even Jasper, clapping him on the back, sharing stories about his father, stories Garrett had never heard before. For the first time, the pain of not knowing didn't hurt. It felt like being welcomed home. That night, under the open sky, Garrett let Beckham run freely along the ridge. No fences, no fear, just freedom. He stood there, hands in his pockets, watching the silhouette of the horse against the stars. Beside him, Coulter stepped up and said quietly, "You gave that horse his life back." Garrett nodded. "No, Grandpa. He gave it back to me."